I was like any other guy from the Midwest, dreaming of finding the perfect woman. I imagined meeting her in the same places my grandma used to talk about, like church. If not for a series of unexpected events, I might have done just that. But my new job right out of college took me in a different direction. I tend to take my time making decisions, but I finally decided to go straight from my undergraduate degree to a master's. I thought that by doing this, I'd be ahead in life. I figured I could skip years of working under people with more experience. I was convinced that experience didn't matter as much as a degree. After all, I had a diploma that said so after 2.5 years. What I didn't realize was that a 25-year-old with a master's degree and no hands-on experience didn't carry much weight in the engineering world. In fact, it felt like it made things harder for me. From day one, it seemed like everyone was against me. At first, the pressure to meet deadlines was overwhelming. But luckily for me, my boss's director was someone who liked to socialize after work, despite his nerdy appearance, pocket protector, pens, the works. He led some of the most advanced aerospace projects, and surprisingly, he was the only one who ever invited me to any of these after-hours gatherings. I was new and didn't quite fit in, especially with my master's degree. I didn't look or act like the rest of the team. I always considered myself decent-looking, and unlike most of my coworkers, I had experience with relationships. This made me stand out, not always in a good way. It was a strange situation. On one hand, I didn't really want to hang out with most of the people in my department. On the other hand, I knew that networking with them was probably the key to making more money in the long run. Thankfully, my second-level boss liked me from the beginning. Even though he never said it directly, I knew he saw me as a valuable asset. He hoped that by inviting me to events, I might bring along someone interesting, maybe even introduce him to a friend. You know how sometimes you meet people through other people? That's what he was banking on. I had been in similar situations before, usually relying on a friend to help me meet new people. One evening last fall, after finishing up a long overdue project, the group started talking about really celebrating after work. It seemed like the perfect opportunity for something different to happen. I kept to myself, as I was used to doing, when Don, my second-level boss, came up to me. "John, I know it hasn't been the easiest adjustment, but you're doing better than anyone expected. You were a big help in making our deadline on the LM project. Just so you know, we're all going to Brooks Cabaret tonight, and everyone would like to see you there." I was excited to be invited. It wasn't that I was desperate for plans, but it felt good to think I was finally breaking through the barrier that had been there from the start. Before the end of the day, several of the guys came up, patted me on the back, and apologized for the cold shoulder they had given me earlier. They encouraged me to come along. It wasn't surprising that the place they picked was an upscale club. Most of the guys in my department were single, earning well over $100K a year. They all had an "I'm so smart" attitude, and if they toned that down a bit, they could probably have a wife or girlfriend at home. They had a lot going for them. Before leaving that day, the plan was set to meet at the club's parking lot at 9 p.m. I was one of the first to arrive, so I got out of my car and walked up to the front door to wait. Over the next 20 minutes, everyone else began to arrive, dressed like they weren't exactly aiming to impress anyone. Suddenly, the door to Brooks swung open and Don yelled, "What are you guys waiting for?" I didn't realize he was already inside. He stepped out and started ushering everyone in. We followed him, and he led us to 3 tables pulled together on the side of the stage. Even before we reached the tables, I noticed 2 incredibly attractive women sitting at the end closest to the bar. I tried to position myself near the end of the table, close to the women, but Don grabbed me by the shoulder and said, "Hey, Tim, sit with me." I didn't have much choice at that point. As we walked to the middle of the tables, I made eye contact with one of the 2 women sitting nearby. For the first time in my life, I felt my heart skip a beat. We exchanged a look that felt like an instant connection. It was as if, in that brief moment, we understood each other without words. Later, I learned her name was Tess. She had a warm, captivating smile and made a point to sit next to me. I was nervous, caught up in her presence, from her light brown hair tied in a ponytail to her graceful demeanor. Everything about her seemed perfect, and she had an air that made anyone feel lucky to be near her. Looking back, I think she might have been wondering how I ended up in this group of people. It quickly became clear to me that our table was the prime spot for attention from all the women in the place. They saw it as the best opportunity to earn money quickly. I mean, with 12 well-paid guys who probably hadn't had much experience with women, it made good business sense. Within an hour, I saw large sums of money being handed over to the dancers. The owner of the club caught on to this quickly. Seeing how much cash was flowing at our tables, he decided to give everyone free drinks for the first hour. They even had something I'd never seen before in a club, those little discs that light up when your table is ready, like at a restaurant. I could handle my liquor pretty well, but it became obvious that most of my coworkers couldn't. The woman I had shared a meaningful glance with earlier noticed me trying and failing to stop some of them from drinking too much. She walked over to me and said with a smile, "Looks like you're playing babysitter tonight." I replied, "No, just trying to keep them from embarrassing themselves too much." She then asked, "I've seen all these guys here before. Are you a friend or relative?" At that moment, I realized she didn't know I was part of the group, almost as if she couldn't believe I was professionally connected to them. I responded, "No, I'm the new aerospace designer on the D-35 project at Adyne, trying to save a deadline for a new part, and wondering if these guys can actually help me keep my job." As I explained, she gave me a surprised look, half smiling and wide-eyed, like she didn't believe me. "Well, excuse me, Professor," she said, clearly skeptical. "So if I ask one of these guys, they'll say you really work with them? Do you even know what they do? I've seen this group before and they've earned their place. I respect that. You seem nice, just don't lie to me." Instead of getting defensive, I found it kind of funny. It was flattering that I didn't fit the geek image they gave off. I chuckled and said, "Yes, if they can still talk clearly, they'll probably say, 'He works harder than we do and deserves the credit, but we've been tough on him.'" It became obvious that these guys were regulars at the club, always bragging about their salaries, their work, and how smart they were. They were trying to cover up the fact that they weren't very good at impressing women. Still, I wasn't bothered by her doubts. I found her skepticism kind of refreshing. It was clear she had seen and heard a lot in her line of work. Just moments after my reply, she said, "Hold on a second," and walked toward Dawn. That's when I truly noticed how stunning she was. I had already admired her beautiful smile, but as she took those few steps, I couldn't help but notice her grace, her tanned legs, petite waist, her blonde hair bouncing as she moved. Everything about her seemed perfect, and I found myself mesmerized. She leaned down to talk to Dawn, who already had company on both sides. I realized she was checking to see if my story was true. I saw her hug him and say something I couldn't hear over the music, confirming my guess. When she returned, her eyes wide, she said, "I'm not used to being wrong, but oh my God. Don said you're one of the most brilliant young engineers he's ever met. I can't believe you work at AD." At that moment, I realized the unexpected benefit of having a boss who had clearly had a bit too much to drink. Since Don was not exactly in his sharpest state, I wasn't about to correct him. I just felt a sense of pride that he would say something so kind about me. As she sat back down, she stayed quiet for a moment, just looking at me with a half smile, shaking her head as if in disbelief. Then, completely out of the blue, she said, "I stand corrected. When you guys first came in, I told my friend Renee you had to be a good-looking friend or relative. You just don't seem like the type to work at AD. We've known Don for a long time. He's been coming here for years. He's such a sweet guy." I responded, "Yeah, Don is a great guy. He's my boss's boss." I had had a few drinks by this point, and the night was starting to feel like it was slipping away. I started thinking it might be time to head to a regular bar, where I might have a better chance of meeting someone. I figured there was no way I could leave this place with someone like Tess, and I didn't want to spend all my money just for a nice conversation. I stood up and said, "Tess, I'm really glad I met you. You're an incredible woman, someone I could never dream of being with, but will always remember. Take care of my coworkers. They're good guys, but they're getting pretty drunk and have way too much money on them." I'll never forget the look she gave me at that moment. It was as if I had broken her heart, and that's when I realized how much I was starting to care about her. She grabbed my arm and said, No, don't go. I need you here with me. I can't keep this group in line by myself. Don gets really funny after a few more drinks, you'll see. Please, stay." As soon as she finished speaking, I hugged her and said, "Tess, you're the most beautiful woman I've ever met. I'll come back to see you, but it's late, and I don't think you'd say yes if I asked you to leave with me right now." Just as I finished, she held my face and said, "Please wait here for a moment. Just stay, okay?" Smiling, I said, "Of course I'm not going anywhere." I watched as she quickly walked over to the bartender, whispered something to him, grabbed her purse from behind the bar, and came back to me with a big smile. She hugged me and said, "I can't believe I found you. Let's get out of here." Surprised, I responded, "Sure, let's go anywhere but here." Playfully, I asked, "Wait, just to be clear, I'm really leaving with you, right? You and me, leaving together?" She laughed and said, "Yes, but I need to grab my things from the back. Meet me out front and I'll pull my car around. We're not allowed to leave with customers, so I'll meet you outside." I nodded and headed over to say goodbye to Don. As I did, he joked, "You lucky guy. You're the first one to leave here with an angel, and Tess is a real angel. Don't mess this up. She's a good person, and if she says you're trouble, you're done." Laughing, I replied, "Don, I promise. I'll treat her with the utmost respect. Who knows, I might be inviting you to our wedding." He chuckled, though his words slurred a little. "She's a gem. If you upset her, I'll personally make sure you're gone. Be good to her. You're the luckiest guy tonight. She's never thought of leaving with anyone before, so you must have made a big impression." I reassured him once more before grabbing my jacket and saying goodbye to the rest of the group. Some wished me good luck with pats on the back, while others gave me looks of disapproval. I realized that not everyone would be happy for me, and that was okay. As I walked into the parking lot, I suddenly remembered I'd parked far away. I thought to myself, if I go to my car, I might miss her. In a moment of panic, I decided to get my car and pull it up to the front door, thinking she'd probably look for me there. As I jogged to the car, a thought crossed my mind. Maybe she was just interested in someone who made good money. But honestly, I didn't care at that point. For the first time in my life, I worried about what kind of car I was driving. Not because it was bad, but because it was nicer than what I could really afford. A few months before graduating college, my brother decided to upgrade his car. He couldn't believe I was still driving my old 1977 Pontiac Bonneville, a car that needed 2 quarts of oil every week. He kept teasing me about getting a better car. He and his wife finally felt so bad for me that they offered me a car I could never have afforded, but with payments that I could just manage. He could have gotten a great trade-in deal, but instead offered it to me. My mom even suggested, "Why not let your brother have it? He can pay you back slowly." So I ended up as a new engineer, buried in debt, driving a 2-year-old convertible Mercedes CLK 320. Even though I suspected she might be attracted to the idea of money, it didn't bother me. I was just trying my best to impress her. The truth is, I didn't feel like I deserved such a nice car, or someone as amazing as her. After getting to my car, I pulled up in front of Brooks and waited a few minutes. Soon, I heard a knock on the window. I quickly turned down the radio and rolled the window down, realizing it was Tess. She said, "My friend needs my car tonight. Can you take me to my apartment first?" "Sure, no problem," I replied. She leaned in, kissed my cheek, and said, "Be right back." In a few moments, she came back out, looking incredible in a pair of jeans and a long-sleeve shirt that fit her perfectly. She got into the car and I smiled, saying, "All right, ready to go?" She replied, "No." It was another moment that completely caught me off guard. Her beauty left me speechless. She gently reached for my hand on the gear shift and said, "Just not yet." For a few seconds, she simply looked at me, and I felt a little unsure. "What's wrong?" I asked nervously. She giggled and said, "I can't believe this. You're such a kind, thoughtful man. I can see it in you. You're smart, you're good-looking, and you're working hard to build a life for yourself. I want to remember this moment. I may never have a moment like this again, and I just want to stay here with you for a little while longer. When you ask me to leave, I'll go." I was stunned. Leave? I didn't want her to leave at all. In that moment, I wanted to ask her to stay forever. Apart from the fact that I was deeply in love with her, I can't quite explain why I suddenly opened up and said, "Usually I try to impress someone as amazing as you, but I feel like I need to be honest. I'm drowning in student loans and I only have this car because my brother gave me a deal. I just bought my first house, but my mom had to co-sign since I didn't have any credit. You're the most beautiful person I've ever met, and I just want you to know that from the start. I've worked hard for my career, and I have nothing to lose by telling you that I fell for you the moment I saw you tonight." We stood in silence for about 20 seconds, just staring at each other with the same look of surprise. Feeling like I had nothing to lose, I leaned in slowly and gently kissed her. People always talk about their best kiss, and this one was mine. If it had been a cartoon, sparks would have been flying everywhere. I took a mental snapshot of the moment, her sweet perfume, a small strand of hair on her lips, and the soft touch of her hand on my face. It was completely mesmerizing. After that unforgettable moment, I decided to go for it and said, "I know this might sound crazy, but why don't we go back to my place? We could lay some blankets on the floor, light a fire, pop in a DVD, cook a frozen pizza, and just relax. Honestly, I just want to spend time with you and pretend for a while that you're all mine." She looked at me with a bit of surprise, then simply said, "Done." In disbelief, I shifted the car into gear, and off we went. It felt like I was back in high school, driving off with the most popular girl in school. It was one of the best moments of my life, like I had found the perfect person. When we got to my house, she couldn't stop talking about how much she loved it. I was proud of it too, even though I hadn't mentioned that my mom had to help me with the mortgage. With my limited credit, I couldn't have gotten approved for the loan on my own. We talked non-stop about where we grew up, our favorite things, dreams for the future, movies, food, trying to make up for all the time we hadn't known each other. We felt so at ease, like we had known each other forever. Tess was confident and independent. I could tell that from the start. She knew what she wanted, wasn't afraid to speak her mind, and had a strong sense of herself. It was refreshing. We did everything we talked about in the car, cooked the frozen pizza, built a fire, and just enjoyed each other's company. We spent the entire night talking, occasionally sharing soft kisses and holding each other by the warmth of the fireplace. The connection between us was undeniable, and I realized she was someone truly special. As we talked, the atmosphere became more intimate, and our closeness deepened. At one point, I felt overwhelmed by how strong the moment was. The way we touched, the way we held each other felt like something I had never experienced before. The hours seemed to slip away as we lost track of time, completely absorbed in each other's presence. As the night went on, we became even more comfortable with one another. But before things could go further, she gently suggested that we wait. She wanted to make sure we built something meaningful without rushing into anything too soon. Although I deeply desired her, I respected her wish and understood the importance of what she was saying. We continued to hold each other, talking softly until the morning light began to peek through the windows. Eventually, we fell asleep together, wrapped in each other's arms, feeling a sense of peace and closeness. Later that morning, I woke up still holding her, feeling the warmth of her body next to mine. The connection we had was still strong, and I felt a deep affection for her. I couldn't help but smile, knowing that this night had brought us closer in ways that went beyond just physical attraction. Instead of rushing, we took our time, savoring the comfort of being together and letting the moment speak for itself. It was clear that what we were building together was special, something that didn't need to be hurried but would grow naturally over time. A gentle night fell over the quiet room, and as I lay beside her, I could feel the connection between us growing stronger. The closeness we shared made every breath feel significant, like we were both aware of the unspoken feelings between us. There was no rush, just a quiet moment where time seemed to slow down. As our bodies rested near one another, it became clear that we were both fully present, sharing in the silence. Her touch on my side signaled her understanding, like we were communicating without words. There was a shared comfort, something that brought us even closer, without the need for anything more than being in the moment together. We moved in sync, finding a rhythm that felt natural. Each shift in position brought us closer, our connection growing deeper as we embraced the unspoken bond we shared. The warmth of her body, the gentle rise and fall of her breathing, and the way we moved together all combined into a moment of complete togetherness. It was an unforgettable feeling, a closeness that seemed to fill the space between us. The intensity of the moment left us both in awe of the connection we had discovered. Every part of the experience felt heightened, as if the world around us had disappeared, leaving only the two of us. As the moment reached its peak, there was a shared understanding that everything had changed between us, a feeling of completion that neither of us could deny. In the quiet aftermath, we stayed close, wrapped in the warmth of the bond we had formed. The night had shifted something between us, leaving us both content and deeply connected in ways we had never expected. After an intense moment, I began to calm down, releasing my grip on Tess's hip. My body felt exhausted, and I gently collapsed onto the pillow beside her. We both caught our breath, and she whispered, "Just stay close to me." She took my hand and held it to her lips, kissing it softly as if she didn't want to let go. We stayed like that for a few minutes, quietly holding each other. Eventually, she giggled and said, "Could you grab me a towel or something? I think we're a bit of a mess." I reached for my shirt and handed it to her. As she wiped herself, she laughed again. "You might need to wash this later." We lay there for a while, chatting lightly. When out of nowhere, she asked, "You want me to go now, don't you?" I looked at her, surprised. "Tess, of course not. Why would you think that?" I stood up and said, "Come with me," taking her small bag with us as we walked through the house. We were both still completely comfortable with each other as we walked. I could barely take my eyes off her, stumbling into things as we moved. When we reached the master bedroom, I started clearing out space in the dresser, moving my clothes into another drawer. Then I made room in the closet, shifting my clothes to one side. Tess kept giggling, asking, "What are you doing?" When I finished, I said, "I don't know why you thought I wanted you to leave, but I just made space for you. You've got a spot in the drawers, one side of the closet, and your car can have the left side of the garage. And if you want, we can go grocery shopping later since I've been eating out too much." Before I could finish, she hugged me tightly. "You're too good to be true," she said, her voice cracking. "This can't be real. If it's not, I don't know how I'll handle it." Tears filled her eyes as she said, "John, this scares me. We just met, and I've never been this close to someone so quickly. I'm afraid of getting hurt." I gently reassured her, reminding her of what Dawn had told me, which seemed to calm her down. I then told her we could take things slowly. I had never felt such a deep connection with anyone before, and I wanted to see where it could go. It took a few weeks before Tess felt comfortable enough to stay with me for more than one night. But after a couple of months, we found ourselves grocery shopping together, picking out curtains, bedspreads, dishes, pretty much everything you need when you're setting up a home. Before we knew it, we were basically living together. One Saturday evening, after 3 wonderful months together, we were browsing a bed and bath store. Tess was thrilled, like a kid in a candy store, carefully choosing everything. I could tell she hadn't had a lot of nice things before because she spent so much time looking at each item. I insisted on paying, but she didn't want me to. She made a decent living at her job, but still kept her apartment. Sometimes I would sneak and pay for things at the counter before she even noticed. That evening, she spent almost 20 minutes deciding between 3 different sets of towels. Then she turned to me, smiling with all 3 sets in her arms, and said, "They're all so pretty. I want the house to be pretty." Without even thinking, I pulled her close and blurted out, "I love you." She dropped the towels and threw her arms around me, her face lighting up. "You said it! You love me, John. I heard you. Did you mean it? Oh, I love you too, John. I love you more than anything. Say it with me. I love you." It was a moment I'll never forget. The people in the store probably thought we were crazy, but we didn't care. We were so caught up in each other that nothing else mattered. After telling each other, "I love you," more times than I could count, I grabbed all the towels she had been considering and bought them. Tess was so happy, she was practically bouncing with excitement. As we walked out, she even shouted back into the store, "He loves me! He said so!" It was the best night of my life, even if the store staff thought we were a little odd. Our relationship grew into something deep and meaningful, the kind of love I had never experienced before. We started visiting each other's families, letting them know we were a serious couple. Tess's family didn't have much, and her father was a bit distant and hard to get to know. But her mother adored me and told me privately that she'd never seen Tess so happy. Tess had been through a tough relationship before, and her mom was grateful that she had finally met someone who treated her well. My parents were supportive from the start. My mom was a bit surprised when I told her Tess used to be an exotic dancer, but she quickly got over it when she saw how happy we were together. Tess and my family got along wonderfully. In fact, my dad, who never let anyone drive his boat, let Tess take the wheel the first time we went out. She was impossible not to love. We even invited both sets of parents to fly to Denver for Thanksgiving, and it was a real treat to have everyone together. Surprisingly, everyone got along well, though Tess's dad still had a bit of his usual attitude. He seemed to feel uneasy around anyone who was doing better than him. But I must admit, he had softened a lot since the first time I met him. Tess, along with both of our mothers, had a great time preparing the meal, setting the table, and making sure the men stayed out of the kitchen. It turned out to be the best Thanksgiving of my life. As we all sat down, Tess and the moms admired the beautiful table they had worked so hard to create. My mom looked at me and said, "John, this is your home. You say the blessing." I tried to pass the honor to someone else, but after some playful back and forth, I decided it was time to do something I had been thinking about for a while. I started the blessing like any other, but as I looked around at everyone with their heads bowed, I added, "And dear Lord, I want to thank you for Tess. She means everything to me, and when I ask her to be my wife, I hope you help her say yes, amen." Before I could finish, Tess jumped up, screaming with excitement, hugging her mom, then my mom, and then running to me, kissing me over and over. She was so thrilled, bouncing around like crazy for at least 5 minutes. My only regret was that we didn't catch it all on video. Both moms were teary-eyed, as was Tess. Tess then rushed outside to the front porch, and in this nice, quiet neighborhood I could only afford with my parents' help, she yelled, "Yes, yes, I will marry you. I'm marrying the man I love." Normally, my parents would have been embarrassed by something like that, but my mom was so caught up in the excitement that she was cheering and hugging my dad just as wildly. My dad finally raised his glass to me and smiled. Tess's dad, however, sat there almost as if he hadn't noticed what had just happened. When things settled down a bit, my mom, grinning, asked, "So, when's the wedding? I want grandkids." My dad shook his head at her and walked over to give me a hug. Tess's dad wasn't the type to get too emotional, but he did eventually come over and shake my hand. From that moment on, Tess and I were closer than ever. My mom, who always wanted a daughter, spent a lot of time flying Tess back and forth from Miami, helping with all the wedding preparations. She had the money and love to give, and Tess was like a dream come true for her. On June 25th, I finally kissed Tess as Mrs. McAllister. Our lives felt perfect. I had been promoted to division chief, earning as much as any 27-year-old engineer could hope for. Everything seemed to be falling into place. A few months after we got married, Tess got her first car that cost more than $1,200. Ever since I met her, she always talked about how much she loved those cute Mercedes. I told my mom several times about the tough life Tess had growing up with very little. That seemed to spark something in my mom, who thought, I can help make up for the hard times she's had. Mom really took to Tess, like it was her mission, and that meant a lot, because for the first time, my mom saw someone who truly loved her son, and she appreciated it. One late summer afternoon, around 5 p.m., Mom flew out to Denver to visit her new best friend, Tess. Before she left that Monday, she decided to take us to a Mercedes dealership, just for some window shopping to wrap up the day. My mom knew Tess was smitten with the SLK model, but she also knew Tess still held on to her old 1999 Ford Explorer. Even after we got married, Tess worked hard to show that she hadn't married for money. She preferred to keep her old SUV rather than have anyone think she married into a wealthy family. My mom had a great sense of people's character, and I'd learned a lot from her in that regard. Before we left the dealership, she casually asked Tess, "If you could choose one, which one would it be?" Tess laughed and said, "Oh, that's easy, the red one. Did you see that interior? The Bose sound system? And it has the upgraded V6 engine, too." It was all just lighthearted talk. Then, out of nowhere, my mom motioned to the sales guy who had been helping us, and as casually as picking out groceries, said, "Give her the keys to that one." The sales guy, eager to help, said, "Absolutely, that's our top model SLK, and you'll love driving it. Let me just grab a temporary tag. I'll have to come along for the ride, though." I started to feel suspicious and shot my mom a look. She quickly returned a glance that said, "Don't you dare say a word, I'm doing this." When the sales guy came back, my mom immediately said, "You're not coming with us." He looked surprised and replied, "Oh, I have to. It's policy that we go along on every test drive." But my mom just grabbed the keys, handed them to Tess, and said, "This is her car now. Unless you want to come over for dinner, you're not coming on this ride." Tess looked at me, confused, as if to ask, "What's happening?" Mom then gave Tess a big hug and said, "It's yours, Tessie. Go enjoy it." She hugged both of us and added, "Let a mom have some fun with her kids. Now go. I've got an airport shuttle coming to pick me up here." That was when I realized my mom had planned this all along. Tess was in shock, overwhelmed by the gesture. No one had ever given her something so meaningful before. She hugged my mom for what felt like 2 whole minutes, saying, "Margie, please, you didn't have to do this. I love you no matter what. I love John and I love you too. The entire family means so much to me. You don't need to buy me anything, really. You're like the mom I always wanted, and John and I are planning to save up for our dream car. You and my new dad should take this money and travel the world." My mom quickly replied, "Sweetheart, let me do this for you. I want you to have this car so much. You're family now, Tess. You're my son's wife, my new daughter, and my friend. Besides, I've already paid for the car, and I can't get my money back." I couldn't help but think, my mom never bought me a Mercedes, but I was so happy seeing how much she cared for Tess. It was unlike her, but in the best way. Tess was thrilled, like she was living in a dream. Every day I could see how much she appreciated everything. Things I took for granted, Tess saw as blessings. It was heartwarming watching her drive around the city, excited like a kid with a new toy. We must have driven a couple 100 miles that night. You'd think that Tess might leave her dancing job behind, especially since I was earning enough for us to live comfortably. But for some reason, she kept going. I think it was important for her to keep a sense of independence. Maybe it was also a bit of a test for me, to see if I'd try to control her choices. But I never did. If she wanted to keep dancing, that was her decision. Even after she started college, Tess kept dancing a few nights a week. She worked late, so I often stopped by near the end of her shift. I had made good friends with everyone there, so I never felt out of place. I never could have guessed how much the environment started to affect me. The more I was there, the more I realized how different it all felt. Tess was incredibly talented, with a natural ability to move gracefully. Watching her dance, it was easy to see why people were captivated. The dim lighting and the atmosphere made everything seem dreamlike, and my mind would wander, imagining scenarios. Tess had a way of connecting with people through her dance, but it was always clear she set boundaries. Even in the private room, where guests could enjoy a more personal experience, she handled herself with poise and professionalism, always making sure things stayed respectful. In the end, it wasn't about the dancing or the job. It was about Tess staying true to herself and me supporting her choices. We were a team, and that's what mattered most. Tess worked as a dancer, and some patrons were allowed to interact more closely with the dancers if they were comfortable with it. It wasn't anything inappropriate, but still a bit more than what would happen out in the main area. Only the most popular dancers would end up in the VIP section, because the men who chose to spend time there usually paid a lot, often more than $300. For that kind of money, the customers were quite selective. Tess and her friend Renee would often be there during the second half of their shifts. The dancers liked this area because it meant they didn't have to work the whole room, fetch drinks, or dance on stage. Newer dancers might have enjoyed the stage, but the veterans knew the real money was in the private rooms. After several weeks of me stopping by regularly, Tess asked me if I wanted to check out the owner's box. I was curious and asked, "What's the owner's box?" She laughed and explained, "It's just a quieter room off the gold room. There's a TV in there, and it's a good place to relax away from the noise." It sounded good to me. I could handle the loud music, but a quieter spot to wait was a nice option. The owner lived far away and only visited occasionally, so there was no issue with me being in there. Tess led me back, and as I walked in, I noticed that the mirror on the wall outside was actually a one-way window. From inside, I could see everything happening in the gold room, but no one could see into the owner's box. I joked with Tess, "What, did the owner sit in here and watch while you danced?" She chuckled and said, "Maybe. You know how some people are." Tess told me to feel free to watch TV or just hang out. Before leaving, she mentioned that she would probably be in the gold room a couple of times before the night ended, so at least I'd know where she was. She laughed and pointed at the window before jokingly adding, "Just don't let me catch you doing anything weird while you're watching through that window." I laughed and replied, "Hey, you never know. You know how people can be." She laughed again and left the room. I stayed there, flipping through some old magazines. About 10 minutes later, I heard a soft noise and turned around. Tess was closing the door to the gold room and guiding a guy towards a long couch that was positioned directly opposite the window. Even though I knew the window was one way and no one could see me, I found myself standing off to the side, feeling slightly nervous about watching. There was something strange about the situation, but at the same time I couldn't help but feel drawn to the room's design and the view it provided. Tess knew I was in the room, but she couldn't see me, and the man she was with had no idea I was watching. I began to wonder why Tess had suggested I stay in this room. Maybe she just wanted to give me a quieter space, but part of me thought she wanted me to see what went on in the gold room. I couldn't quite figure out why. Was it to reassure me that nothing out of line was happening, or to see how I'd react? Maybe she thought I'd be okay with it. Honestly, I didn't know for sure. The man sat down with a drink while Tess turned away from him, leaning toward the mirror. The way she was looking at the mirror made me think she imagined I was standing there, watching. Her eyes were slightly lifted, not staring at herself, but looking at the space where she thought I would be. As she danced, there was something playful in her expression. She smiled a little, touched her lips, and occasionally bit her lower lip. She was wearing a tight electric blue dress and heels, and I could only imagine how the man must have felt watching her. Tess turned and sat across from him, her knees on either side of him. She kept glancing back at the mirror. At one point, the man placed his hands on her waist, and I noticed she didn't move them away. I had seen her dance many times, but this felt different. It seemed like she wanted me to see everything that was happening. I was focused on every move she made when suddenly Tess got up and gestured to the man that she'd be back in a second. I quickly composed myself, sitting down in a chair as the door opened and shut. Tess walked in, and I met her halfway. "Hey, baby, how do you like this room?" she asked with a playful look. "It's great," I replied. "Much quieter than out front." She glanced at me with a mischievous smile. "Is that all? Just quieter?" At this point, I gently brought Tess closer and began to kiss her. She then pulled away slightly, giggling and asking, "Are you sure there's nothing else you like about this room?" I understood what she was hinting at, but I needed to respond carefully to stay composed. As she playfully asked a couple more times, I replied, "It has a nice view too." She looked momentarily surprised, though I knew what she expected to hear. She then said, "Renee mentioned that sometimes people enjoy a bit of playful teasing. Is that true?" She placed her hand on mine, and before I could respond, she smiled and asked, "What do you like about it? Please tell me, I really want to know." As she continued to ask and laugh, I adjusted her dress slightly. She moved her leg a bit, allowing me to reach out. The moment our hands touched, I felt a strong connection. Trying to stay mindful of her questions, I responded openly. As our interaction continued, she stopped asking questions and began to show her affection in her own way. After a short while, I leaned in and kissed her again before softly saying, "Sometimes I find myself imagining different scenarios." Just as I finished speaking, Tess responded by embracing me more closely and expressing her feelings without words. I waited for her to say something, but she continued to hold me tightly, sharing the moment silently. Up to this point in my life, I couldn't remember a more meaningful moment. Her silence made me realize that our roles had shifted. Still unsure how to interpret her actions, I asked, "Is imagining different things why you wanted us to be here?" It was interesting that just moments before, I was the one feeling uncertain. Now I could see she was also contemplating her response. In the few minutes we had been interacting, our connection had grown stronger. The more we communicated, the closer we felt. After only a short time, it seemed like our bond had deepened significantly. I kept asking her the same questions, enjoying that I was now the one seeking answers. Every question got a strong reaction, but she still hadn't told me what she thought about the surprising news I shared. As she became more engaged and showed emotions I hadn't seen before, I continued to ask, "How do you feel about what I was thinking? Does it affect you knowing I was watching?" When I repeated it, she grabbed my arm firmly. I soon realized that her responses grew stronger with the intensity of my questions. By now, my questions were more about provoking a reaction than getting clear answers. I will never forget what happened when I said, "I really want to see you." As I spoke, her whole body jolted and became still, and she began to tremble. She closed her eyes tightly with her mouth half open. At first, I wasn't sure what was happening. I started to worry, not knowing what was going on as she held her breath. I thought she might be having a medical emergency. At one point, I almost shook her to bring her back. When your spouse stops breathing, her body goes rigid, and the veins in her neck stand out. You begin to wonder what's happening. Then I realized she was experiencing something intense. Her fingernails dug into my arm until she finally exhaled with a deep breath. At that moment, I felt warmth in my hand. There was a strong rush, followed by several less intense ones. I noticed the changes just before each wave. I realized that people might think they've seen something many times, but very few witness the real thing. I thought I had experienced it before, but I learned otherwise. She later told me that at that moment she realized she had never truly felt that way before. She explained that every time in the past when she thought she had, it was just close but not quite there. I think the intensity of the experience actually scared her a bit as it happened. Tess had never felt a moment so overwhelming, something that took over her completely. She spoke about how intense it was, even more than she had imagined from stories about other people's experiences. She laughed and said, "If only a volcano could be this powerful, this was something else entirely." She later explained that while it was happening, she felt a mix of joy and concern, fearing she might never feel that way again. The experience was so strong it felt like it took control of her entire body. When it happened, she described the feeling as so powerful she even felt it in her face. I had never heard anyone express something like that before. The moment lasted a long time, and eventually she found her strength fading. As she caught her breath, she said, "We need to go home now. Please take me home." She started moving slowly, trying to steady herself, and asked me to let someone know she wouldn't be returning. Unsure how to explain it, I peeked through the door. The guy was leaning back, surprised when I suddenly called out, "Tess had to leave for home. She wanted me to let you know." He spilled some of his drink, looking shocked, and said, "Oh, I hope everything is okay. Tell her goodbye." After a few minutes, I went into the bathroom to check on Tess. She was staring at herself in the mirror, gripping the sink, looking worried. "Oh my God, please don't be angry with me," she said, eyes welling up. I stepped closer and asked, "Angry? Why would I be angry?" She started to cry a little, saying, "I just had an amazing experience with the man I love, and it was complicated because of what he said." What many people might not understand is that this experience was new for both of us. I had never heard of anything like it before. I'm not sure what led to it, but that didn't matter much to me. As I approached her from behind, I tried to comfort her. I said, "I love you so much, just remember that. And it doesn't matter what made you feel that way. I was there with you, and I've never seen anything like it before. It was special for me too." Normally, I don't always say the right things, but this seemed to calm her down. She turned around and hugged me tightly. She stood there for a few minutes as I held her face and gently kissed her lip. Finally, she said, "Let's go home, my love." She smiled and shared a sweet kiss. Afterward, she said, "I can't believe how much I love you." We finished up and got to the car, but she still seemed a bit off. It looked like she was still trying to process what had just happened and maybe feeling a little guilty about it. About 10 minutes into the drive from the club, she suddenly said, "Pull over. Just find a street and stop anywhere." I quickly asked, "Are you okay? Is everything all right?" She replied, "I need you to stop, please." I said with concern, "We're only 20 minutes from home." Without warning, she leaned over the console and started kissing me. She insisted, "Just stop the car." To avoid any accidents, I asked, "All right, but are you sure you're okay? What is it?" She pointed towards a side street, looking a bit anxious, and said, "Just turn in there. I feel something again." I could see she was quite restless and caught up in her feelings. Just as I said we could wait, she tried to push her limits even further. I quickly turned into the alleyway, concerned but caught in the moment. As I parked the car, I noticed how she was feeling overwhelmed. It made me think maybe from now on, she would explore her feelings more freely, just to capture that sensation again. Tess had recently started college, but she still danced at night 3 times a week. Since she always worked the evening shift, I made it a point to visit her during her last hour or two at work. I had plenty of friends while I was there because I got along well with everyone who worked at the club. I never expected what started happening to me. The more I was around it, the more my imagination ran wild. Tess was a fantastic dancer. She moved in a way that caught everyone's attention. With the low lighting and my usual spot at the far end of the bar, it was easy to picture her dancing closely with some of the guys. What intrigued me was how she would wrap her arms around their necks, getting close while she danced. It was common for a guy to put his hands on her, but she would gently move them away. This was what typically happened in the main area of the club. However, there was a private room called the Gold Room, where guests could have more personal dances. It had a separate waitress, and there was a bit more freedom for touching, as long as the dancer was comfortable. While it didn't lead to anything serious, guests could be a little more friendly. Not to brag, but only the best dancers got invited to this private area. Most men who chose to go there spent quite a bit of money, so they had high standards. Tess and her friend Renee often spent the last part of their shifts in that room. The dancers preferred it because they didn't have to deal with running around or performing on stage. While some new dancers liked the main floor, the experienced ones knew where to earn more. After several weeks of me visiting, Tess invited me to the owner's box, as she called it. Curious, I asked, "The owner's box?" She laughed and said, "Yes, it sounds funny, but it's just a quieter room next to the Gold Room. It has a TV so we can relax away from the noise." That sounded perfect to me. I could handle the loud music, but I looked forward to some peace while I waited. The owner lived far away and only came in once a week, so there was no issue with me being in there. When Tess took me to the owner's box, I walked in and noticed the mirrored wall was actually a one-way window. I could see the entire Gold Room, but no one could see inside the box. I joked to Tess, saying, "What? Did he just sit here while you danced?" She laughed and replied, "Oh, probably." "You know how men are," I said. She told me to turn on the TV or just relax. Before leaving, she giggled and pointed at the window, saying, "I'll probably be in the Gold Room a few times before my shift ends, so at least you'll know where I am." She then popped her head back in after closing the door and jokingly said, "Don't get into any trouble while I'm gone." I laughed and replied, "Hey, you never know. You know how men are." She laughed again and left. I wandered around the room, flipping through old sports magazines. After about 10 minutes, I heard a soft thump. I slowly turned around and saw Tess closing the Gold Room door and leading a guy toward the long couch opposite the large window. Even though I knew the window was completely one way, I stood at its edge, feeling a bit hesitant to stand right in front of it. For some reason, I felt a new sense of curiosity being in this room and looking through the window. Tess knew I was there but couldn't see me, and the customer had no idea. I began to wonder why Tess suggested I stay in this room. While it was kind of her to offer me a quieter place, I couldn't help but think she wanted me to see what she does in the Gold Room. Maybe it was to reassure me that nothing inappropriate was happening, to gauge my reaction, or perhaps she thought I might find it interesting. I honestly didn't know which it was. Perhaps all three. The guy sat down with a drink, and Tess turned toward him and leaned near the mirror. The way she looked at it made me think she imagined I was standing right behind it. Her eyes were slightly raised, so I knew she wasn't looking at herself. She seemed to be picturing where I might be watching. The expression she gave as she moved made me feel uneasy. She gave a playful glance as she moved. I could only imagine what the guy saw since Tess was wearing her usual work outfit. Eventually, she sat beside him. She kept glancing back at the mirror. At one point, the man placed his hands on Tess, and for the first time, I saw her react differently when someone touched her. It was then that I noticed my hand moving without thinking. I had seen Tess interact with many people before, but this time felt different. First, I thought she wanted me to watch what was happening. Second, I had never been in a situation like this while feeling distracted. The combination of watching Tess with someone else and feeling uneasy made my emotions run high. I was completely focused on her movements when suddenly she stood up and signaled to the man with a "be right back, just 1 second" gesture. I quickly gathered myself and moved to sit in a chair as the door opened and closed. As I started to walk toward Tess, she asked, "Do you like this room?" I quickly replied, "Oh yes, it's great, much quieter than out front." She then asked playfully, looking out of the corner of her eye, "Is that all? Just quieter?" At that moment, I pulled Tess closer and began to kiss her passionately. She then pulled away slightly and asked, Is there something else you like about this room? I knew what she was trying to get me to say, but I had to be careful with my response, wanting to stay in control. As she asked a couple more times, I answered, "It has a pretty good view, too." Her mouth opened slightly as if she was surprised, though I knew she expected that answer. She then explained, "Renee said I should let you come back here, that sometimes people like to watch their partner." How true is that? She placed her hand near me, and before I could respond, she smiled and said, "Wow, Renee was right. What do you like about it? Tell me what you like. I really want to know now. You have to tell me." As she continued asking and laughing, I lifted the front of her dress and reached out. She moved her leg slightly, allowing me to approach her. The moment I did, I felt a new level of excitement. Trying to stay calm while answering her questions, I expressed my feelings openly. As I interacted with her more firmly, she stopped asking questions and began to respond warmly. After about 10 seconds, I leaned down and kissed her again, then gently pulled away and said, as I watch, "I'm imagining that you're with someone else." As soon as I said it, Tess moved her body closer to me, responding with a long sigh. I waited for her to say something, but she just kept leaning in and kissing me passionately. Up to this point in my life, I can't remember feeling something this exciting. It hit me that I had surprised her with my words. Still puzzled by her silence, I asked, "Is it because I talked about you being with another guy that you brought me back here?" Funny enough, just moments before, I was the one unsure of what to say. Now it was her turn to think. With each moment, I noticed how much she was caught up in the moment. I could feel that she was very engaged as I kept talking. The more I spoke, the more intense the feelings between us became. I continued asking her questions, relishing the fact that I was now the one who needed to know. Each question brought a strong response from her, but she still hadn't shared her thoughts on what I had said. As she became more involved, I asked, "Does it excite you to know what I was thinking? Did you realize I was so aware of you, picturing you being with someone else?" Just after I repeated the question, she grabbed onto my arm, clearly lost in the moment. I quickly understood that her excitement grew with each question I asked, so my comments became more about sparking her feelings, and less about really finding out what she was thinking. I will always remember what happened when I said, "I wish I could see you with someone." At that moment, her entire body tensed, and I noticed her reaction. Her eyes closed tightly, and she seemed to hold her breath. I started to worry, unsure of what was happening. It seemed serious, and I was concerned. When someone you care about suddenly stops reacting like they normally do, you really start to question what's going on. I quickly realized something intense was happening. I could see she was trying hard and holding her breath, but I didn't know why. Her grip on my arm was very strong until she finally breathed out with relief. As she exhaled, a warm liquid flowed into my hand and down her legs, my wrist and forearm as I knelt down. There was a strong flow followed by several smaller ones. Each time her grip tightened around my fingers. I learned that many men think they've experienced numerous intense moments, but only a few have truly felt it. I used to believe I had, but I was wrong. Later, she told me that this was the first time she had a real, intense experience. Before, she thought she had felt it, but it was only in her imagination. This experience was so powerful that it frightened her. Think about it. You've never felt something so overwhelming that it took over your body. It might be scary for her. Tess had heard that some people see bright colors or imagine big events during such moments. However, she said her experience was so strong that nothing could compare. She joked, if a volcano could match that power, but it was even more intense. She explained that even while it was happening, she feared she might never feel it again. It was so powerful that she couldn't breathe. The strong feeling took over her entire body, her muscles, and her breathing. She said that when she felt that rush, it was like her whole body was involved, one feeling after another. I had never heard such a detailed description before. It lasted about 3 minutes until she could barely stand. Finally, she felt calm enough to speak and said, "We have to go home now. Please take me home." She slowly walked toward the bathroom in the room. As she did, she said, "Look out and tell that guy I won't be back. Please." I didn't know how to do that. I looked through the two-way mirror and saw him leaning back with one arm over his head, drinking his drink. I thought for a moment as I went to the door. I leaned out and said, Tess got a call from home and had to leave. She wanted me to let you know. After spilling some of his drink, he quickly sat up and replied, "Oh no, I hope everything is okay. Tell her I said goodbye." I walked into the bathroom to check on Tess. She was holding the sink, looking into the mirror, and said, "Oh no, are you mad at me? Please don't be upset." I interrupted her and asked, "Why would I be upset, sweetheart?" Tears started forming in her eyes as she said, "Well, I just had a really amazing moment with someone I care about deeply, and it was while he talked about another guy being involved. It wasn't supposed to be like that, John." What many people might not realize is that it was new for me, too. I had never even thought about anything like that before, but in that moment, it happened. I walked up behind her and hugged her tightly, saying, "Sweetheart, I love you so much. Just remember that. But honestly, I don't mind what led to what you felt. The important thing is that it happened, and I was there to see it. Have you ever seen anything like that? Neither have I. It was new for me, too." Normally, I struggle to find the right words, but this seemed to comfort her. She turned around and held me tightly for a long time. After a few moments, she said, "Let's go home." I replied, "Sure, let's go." About 10 minutes from the club, she suddenly said, "Pull over, just anywhere." I asked, "Are you okay? Do you need something?" She immediately said, "I need you. Just stop the car." I replied, "But we're only 20 minutes from home." Then she leaned over the console and kissed me, insisting, "Stop the car. It's too far." I responded, "All right, are you sure you're okay? We'll be there soon." She pointed towards an alley, saying, "Just pull in there. I think I can feel it again." She seemed very eager. Just as I started to say, "No, we can wait," she was already reaching for her clothes, saying, "John, I can feel it again. I really need to." Surprised, I quickly turned the car into the alley. As I parked, she excitedly said, "I'm so close," and kept talking rapidly about how she was feeling. "I'm feeling a strong need to connect," she said, and I started to worry about her. It seemed like she wanted to experience something deep and intense, and I wondered if she might seek that out with someone else, simply to feel it again. As we parked in a quiet spot, she quickly moved to the back seat, and I followed her in. I began to touch her like I had at the club. For several minutes, everything felt the same. But then I noticed she seemed a bit anxious, almost impatient, as if she felt she should have already reached a peak. That's when it hit me. I wasn't saying anything to excite her mind. I had been distracted, thinking about her interest in someone else from the club. I decided to switch things up and tease her a bit more. "It would be fun if we had that guy with us," I suggested. Immediately, I could sense a shift in her energy. She took a sharp breath and asked, "Why?" I replied, "If he were here, I could be watching the two of you together." That seemed to do the trick. I kept talking along those lines for a minute or two until she reacted strongly, overwhelmed by a strong emotion. I soon realized that for her to truly enjoy the moment, I needed to engage both her physically and mentally. In the weeks that followed, she experienced many joyful moments, and we found ourselves hurrying to the bedroom whenever we could. I also became a familiar face in the place where Tess worked. Then one evening, as we enjoyed our time together, I brought up a topic we often joked about, her seeing another man. "We keep talking about it. Are we just going to let it stay talk?" I asked. Tess didn't answer but kept moving enthusiastically, caught up in the moment. I pressed her, and finally she replied, "I don't mind if it happens, but you need to set it up. I don't want to be the one arranging it." That made sense to me. I thought it was better this way too. The last thing I wanted was to walk in and find her with someone else asking me, "What do you think?" The thought made me anxious as I started to wonder how I would approach it, when it would occur, and if I really wanted it. Days went by as Tess and I continued to talk about the idea. Just discussing it led to some passionate moments between us. I started to wonder if things were good enough between us. Our relationship had never felt stronger, yet she hadn't been with anyone else. But if I was honest, we had mostly been enjoying the idea of it, which can only last for so long without action. This made me turn to the internet. One weekend, while Tess was visiting her mom, I found myself looking at various websites about what we had been discussing. At first, I felt strange searching for men who might be interested in Tess, but I thought it was better than approaching a stranger and asking, "Hey, would you like to spend time with my wife?" I was surprised and relieved to find so many people interested in similar ideas. It made me feel less odd about it. When I searched on one of the sites within 100 miles, I couldn't believe how many results came up. There were at least 300 profiles that matched what I was looking for. It was a little overwhelming at first. When someone starts exploring this kind of fantasy, tough questions come up like, what age, type, etc. When just dreaming about it, I hadn't really thought about those details. I just imagined someone with Tess. Now, though, it felt like I was choosing options for a car. I've always thought of myself as average, not too big or too small, but being with Tess was never a problem. But now that I was considering someone else, it suddenly felt important. The more I looked, the more my imagination expanded. After sorting through hundreds of profiles, I narrowed it down to about 15 guys, all living within a reasonable distance. I sent messages to all of them, but didn't get any replies. Later that evening, I shared a few photos of Tess, making sure her face was unrecognizable. They showed her amazing figure without revealing her identity. I logged off shortly after creating our profile, but just before going to bed, I thought I'd check the site again for any responses to Tess's pictures. Several hours had passed, and I assumed there would be some notices. As soon as I logged back in, I saw that my inbox was flashing with 37 new messages. I expected a lot would be junk, but I was amazed to see that 10 of the 15 I had contacted replied, along with several others. At that moment, I felt a sense of pride. Tess was definitely one of the best women on the site, no matter how you looked at it. Out of the 10 women who replied to my messages, 6 shared their phone numbers, email addresses, and other ways to connect. I was surprised that so many people were willing to share their information with someone they didn't know. I started emailing a few of them, and after we trusted each other a little, I sent a nice picture of Tess and me. They seemed really excited about it, almost like they wanted to send me all their personal details. I wanted to find someone who seemed normal and sincere, maybe the top 3 choices. I asked them some straightforward questions like, how do you take care of your health? Have you been checked for any diseases recently? Tess would like to see a full body picture to make sure it's really you. I felt a bit uncomfortable about that last question since Tess didn't know what I was doing. But the more I asked, the fewer options I had, which is what I wanted. Tess would be away for a week, which I thought was enough time since many of these guys would probably share just about anything if I asked. I learned a lot from my questions, and surprisingly, they shared even more than I expected. I kept asking questions until Sunday afternoon, when the last 2 men suggested we meet at a restaurant or bar. Even if Tess had been back, I wasn't sure about that idea. I did tell them the truth that Tess was out of town for a week, and mentioned that she had told me I would need to plan things if anything happened. Both guys were okay with meeting up to talk and see if we were all safe. Plus, I wanted to make sure that neither of them had any unexpected interests. I met one guy on a Tuesday evening and the other on Thursday. One of them suggested that maybe in a couple of weeks, if Tess agreed, we could all meet at a hotel to talk and see how things went. Tom, the guy I met on Thursday, was quite interesting. We talked about many subjects, but most importantly, we laid out a plan to help him and Tess meet. He seemed very normal, and to my surprise, he showed me a medical document from 4 weeks ago. It showed that he had been tested for all known diseases that could be spread through close contact. He told me it was a normal procedure where he worked. I wasn't sure how Tess would feel about him being possibly in his late 40s or early 50s, but he looked good for his age. It was clear he had always taken good care of himself. Still, Tess is 22, and he is maybe 52. Tess had danced for older men before, but if they became close, he would certainly be the oldest one she had been with. On the other hand, he did seem to be in better shape than many younger men, and honestly, I felt a bit relieved that he was older. It somehow made me feel less threatened. When I mentioned a detailed plan earlier, I meant it. I finally admitted that Tess had no idea how I would set this up. She just knew I was trying to arrange something. I thought it might be a good idea for him to visit Tess at her workplace. Without her knowing, I wanted him to see if they could spend some time in the gold room after hours, with me watching from the owner's box. It didn't bother me that he knew where Tess worked. He didn't know much about us, and that made me feel okay about it. I told him about the gold room, where Tess and the other dancers sometimes entertained men with more intimate performances, and where they could earn extra money. I explained that if he came in next Saturday night, he could tell Tess he wanted a private dance, and she would take him to the gold room. Planning this made me feel guilty and excited. I felt guilty that Tess wouldn't know what was happening until it happened. but excited that it could help spark her interest. I explained that once they were in the gold room, if the moment seemed right and if she was comfortable, he could try to be more touchy. I told him if he succeeded, I would come out of the owner's box and share what we had planned, hopefully making everything flow from there. I reminded him to only ask to go to the gold room after 1:30 a.m. It wasn't unusual for Tess to give private dances close to closing time. If she did, she would often be the last dancer left and would help lock up. Since I always stayed with her after work, it would be perfectly normal for just us three to be there at 2 a.m. when the place closed, as the door attendant and bartenders usually wanted to leave as soon as they could. My presence helped make that happen. They didn't have to worry about one of the dancers being alone with a customer. At first, he was hesitant because he hadn't met Tess and didn't know what to expect. However, he quickly realized that meeting someone like Tess was a rare opportunity, so he decided to go ahead. As we spent more time together, the conversation flowed more easily. I mentioned that if the photos he had weren't altered, they would show Tess in a very impressive way. This made him very excited, and he ended up buying all our drinks that night. Before leaving, I advised him in the parking lot that even though he was confident about everything being okay, it was a good idea to be prepared for any situation. I suggested he bring something just in case things didn't go as planned. He emailed several times that week to confirm our plans for the upcoming Saturday, and I assured him everything was set. Every time I talked to Tess on the phone after making these arrangements, I wanted to share my thoughts. But I decided it was better to keep things spontaneous, believing it would make the experience more natural. Tess returned to town on Friday at noon, and I picked her up from the airport. She greeted me warmly with hugs and smiles, acting as if she had been away for a long time. The rest of the day was normal, but later that night, I couldn't stop thinking about what was about to happen. I debated whether to discuss my thoughts with her, but decided to wait and see how things unfolded. That evening, Tess and I spent time together, and the experience felt different from usual, partly because I was anticipating the next day's events. It's important to note that my initial intention wasn't to arrange anything specific for her, but things developed naturally. I compared one of the items in the room to something I had seen before, but I wasn't sure if it was exactly the same. Tess seemed more relaxed than ever, and I was confident she would handle whatever came her way. Despite any challenges, I knew she would do her best to make the situation work. In many ways, I hoped his size was smaller than what I saw in the pictures. I wasn't sure how I would feel if Tess got really interested, or if he made her feel more pleasure than I could. As Saturday evening came, I watched Tess go through her usual routine. She took her time in the shower, shaved her legs, and picked out her outfit. I felt so nervous that I could hardly speak without sounding silly. Several times she asked, "Are you okay? You seem a bit tense." I lied and said, "Oh, I'm fine, really." Tess had many nice outfits, but this time, as she showered, I found myself looking through them. I wanted to pick the most beautiful one. Finally, I chose a tight white dress that came just above her knees. Even as I took it to the bed, I imagined how nice she would look in it. When Tess came out of the shower, she said, "Oh, thanks. You picked this dress for me. You've never done that before. It must be your favorite." I quickly replied, "Oh, you have no idea." Tess drove to work like usual and said, "I'll see you later. Try to come by midnight so I won't miss you too much." She gave me a kiss and left. As soon as she drove away, I called Tom and said, "Well, she's off to work. We'll soon find out how this goes." He calmly replied, "If it doesn't work out, at least we tried." I laughed and said, "True. I'll be there around midnight too. You should arrive around the same time. I'll be at the far end of the bar." Waiting for 11:30 p.m. felt like forever. I couldn't wait, so I left a few minutes early. I reached the club and greeted friends I had made over time. I settled at my usual spot at the bar and asked Mark, the bartender, for a drink. He raised an eyebrow and said, "Not like you, John. What's going on?" I answered, "Just feeling like having a drink." I started to worry if Tom was going to show up. By 12:20 a.m., he was still missing, and I was taking shots so fast that I might not even recognize him. Just when I was about to give up, I saw him walk in and pay at the door. He must have found my spot because he walked straight toward me. We shook hands like old friends, and I ordered him a beer. I kept enjoying my drink, a wild turkey. Tess came over a few times while I was at the bar. She noticed me drinking and gave me a little sign. I did my best to explain what I was doing, just like I had told Mark before. After Tess signaled, I saw Mark quietly pour some drink into a glass and mix it with soda. She leaned in and told me that all the girls had a special sign for when they wanted a drink. The owner let them have a little to drink, but they couldn't order when customers were around. This was their way of getting around the rule. Plus, the girls made sure to give good tips to Mark, so he was always happy to help them out. Around 1:25 a.m., Tess came up to me and I could see she had a nice buzz going. I, on the other hand, was feeling really good. When Tess reached me, I said, "Hey there, Tom has been saying great things about you all night and wants to see what the gold room is like." Tess smiled widely and jokingly said, loud enough for Tom to hear, "Are you my gold room manager now?" We all laughed, and then she added, "It's getting late, but I suppose I could show him. By the way, in case he hasn't mentioned it, he's my husband. But don't worry, he understands. He's never told me to stop dancing." Tom responded, "That's awesome. I bet you really enjoy it too, right?" She smiled and replied, "It keeps me fit, and until I finish college, it's the best money I can make. I was dancing when I met John." As Tess and Tom continued chatting about our relationships, I couldn't help but wonder if Tom might think we were too nice a couple for this to happen and decide to leave. I asked Mark for another double drink and stepped off my stool, hinting that I was heading towards the gold room. Tess took the hint and told Tom to go ahead and take his beer. She would join him in a few minutes. Those few minutes were always my time with Tess in the owner's box. But this time felt very different. I got there first and quickly made my way to the owner's box. Just 20 seconds after I arrived, I watched through the mirror as Tess came in with Tom and sat him down on the couch. She then said, "I'll be right back. Just going to freshen up. Don't go anywhere." Tom replied nervously, "No problem. Take your time. I'll wait here." Tess quickly entered the room. She looked amazing. I found myself admiring everything about her, from her nice feet to her glossy lips and matching nails. She was truly stunning. But this time, when Tess got to me, I didn't say anything at all. I quickly adjusted her dress, and as we kissed, I gently moved her clothing aside. Within seconds, I found myself in a situation I hadn't anticipated and started saying some unusual things. In the past, I had made playful comments, hinting at her being with other men. But this time, I was feeling different and caught up in many thoughts coming together. I began saying things like, "Imagine he's very close to you. Imagine me watching while you interact with him. It would be quite something if things got intense between you two." She became more engaged in what I was saying, moving faster than usual. I was also trying harder to connect with her. Instead of subtle hints, I was being very direct. This continued for a few minutes until she grabbed my arm like she often did right before something significant happened. At that moment, I stopped and began to adjust her clothing completely. She looked at me and said, "John, I was so close. Why are you changing my clothes? I know you wanted to have some fun, but not like this." I quickly responded, "Baby, we're the only ones here, and it's just for fun. Maybe let me watch you interact. It would mean a lot to me." She nervously bit her lip and fidgeted before finally saying, "We'll see. I'm not sure. I'll make sure no one else is around, but I can't promise anything." She wanted to put her clothes back on, but I convinced her to continue. As she left the room, she apologized for keeping the other person waiting. Before approaching him, she said, "One sec," as she opened the door back into the club. She hurried back to me and said, "All the music and lights are off in that area, but I'm not sure if I can handle this situation at work. I love you, and while this is exciting, messing around at work wasn't what I had in mind when we talked about trying new things. I can't promise anything. Besides, he's much older than me." I chuckled and replied, "Just think, you'll be amazing in both your relationships." She stood on her toes, gave me a quick kiss on the cheek, and murmured, "This is crazy, this is crazy." She left the area for the last time, pulling her dress down. I wondered how she would interact without drawing too much attention. There was always loud dance music in the gold room, but this time I watched as Tess approached and lowered the volume a bit. You could still hear the music, but it wasn't as loud as usual. I think Tess was making sure I could hear her if she needed me. As she walked back to the man, she started moving in a very graceful way. When she stood in front of him, she bent down slightly and moved her hair around. She was putting a lot of energy into her dance, more than I had ever seen before. She danced like this for about a minute, then suddenly sat down on the couch next to him. She slowly moved her knee to the side. As she did, her dress shifted a bit. Tess was moving in a lively way, making strong eye contact with me. The way she moved was impressive, especially how she coordinated her movements. The man had his hands on her waist as she continued dancing. She kept this up for about 20 seconds before the man adjusted his position. I wasn't sure how much longer this would continue. It seemed like the man wanted to get closer, and Tess had mentioned before that she wasn't comfortable with him getting too close. The situation was becoming intense, and I felt overwhelmed. He continued interacting with her for about half a minute before moving his hand lower. I watched as his hand moved closer to Tess. I was shocked by what I was seeing. Within seconds, his hand reached a more personal area. He hesitated for a moment before making contact. By this time, I felt a strong urge to take action. I realized I needed to do something. Feeling more agitated than ever, I decided to act quickly. I pulled up my pants and stood up, trying to regain my composure. I then left the owner's box, my shirt still untucked and breathing heavily. Tess didn't notice me right away. I walked up behind her and she jumped when I startled her, saying quickly, "Oh no." "What, baby? What?" As she finished speaking, I began hugging her tightly and pulling her closer. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Tom slowly unbuttoning his shirt. Tess started mumbling as I continued to hold her. "John, baby, what are we doing? Is there something I need to know?" I stayed silent and kept hugging her. Then, I gently took her face with my right hand and pulled her closer as I leaned in. I wanted to get a better view of Tom while keeping Tess from noticing him. As Tom lowered his shirt further, I felt uneasy. He adjusted his shirt, and the photos he had shared didn't show everything. It was clear he was getting ready for something. He then lowered his shirt more and adjusted his posture, making his presence more noticeable. I softly held both sides of Tess's face and said, "Trust me, baby, just trust me. Will you trust me?" She frowned with a worried look, and after a few seconds nodded her head yes. I softly told her, "Just close your eyes, baby. It's okay. Close your eyes." She hesitated for a moment before finally closing them. Once her eyes were closed, I knelt to one knee and gently touched her back. I glanced at Tom and gave a signal to get ready. I then leaned over slightly, looking at Tess. I placed both hands on her back and adjusted her position. As I did this, Tom saw exactly what I was doing and adjusted himself further. When he was in position, I began to guide Tess towards him. She understood what I was doing and went along with it. Within a second, Tom made contact with Tess. Just as I saw Tom engaging with Tess, I stood back up and moved her chin towards me, hugging her from behind again. As I did, I placed my hands on the top of her hips and slowly began to apply downward pressure. Immediately, Tess gasped in surprise. Her reactions were overwhelming me. I increased the pressure gradually. As I did, I felt Tom adjust Tess further. It wasn't until about 2 minutes later that I began to feel her moving on her own. They weren't long movements, maybe only 2 to 3 inches each. As she started, I heard Tom making sounds just as she was reacting. I then began whispering in her ear, "Do you like how things are going, baby? Is everything okay?" Tess didn't respond at first. She just kept reacting with each movement. After a few seconds of me whispering, she began to speak softly. "Maybe we should be more careful." As she said this, I continued to guide her movements. It was clear that even after a minute or more, things were still progressing slowly. I started applying more pressure. As I did, she began to react strongly. Tom also began to move in sync with her, holding her firmly. About half a minute into this, I could feel that Tess was fully engaged, and the movements became longer and more complete. I whispered into Tess's ear again, saying, "I love watching you. I can't wait to see how things develop. Do you want to continue?" After at least a minute of this, I asked one last time, "Do you want to go further?" Up to this point, she had only suggested being cautious, but suddenly she responded loudly, "Do you want to take this further? It's your decision, honey. It's okay. I know it's what you want. I'm going to go ahead." They continued their interaction intensely when I gently pulled her back to me, kissing her and softly saying, "When you're ready, take the next step." We began kissing passionately as she reacted strongly. She finally said, "Okay." She then gave a faint smile and said, "I hope we don't regret this." I knelt down again, my heart racing. I couldn't believe how involved everything was as their actions became more intense. Their interaction was very close. and it was clear that Tess was deeply focused on what was happening. I had never seen her react this way before. It didn't match how she usually was with me, but there she was, fully engaged with Tom. I couldn't imagine what he was feeling as things progressed between them. They weren't long movements, maybe only 2 to 3 inches each. As she began, I started hearing Tom making sounds as she reacted. I then whispered in her ear, "Do you like how things are going, baby? Is everything okay?" Tess didn't respond at first. She just kept moving. After a few seconds of me whispering, she began speaking softly. "Maybe we should be more careful." As she said this, I continued to guide her movements. It was clear that even after a minute or more, things were still progressing slowly. I started applying more pressure. As I did, she began to react strongly. Tom also began to move in sync with her, holding her firmly. About half a minute into this, I could feel that Tess was fully engaged, and the movements became longer and more complete. I whispered into Tess's ear again, saying, "I love watching you. I can't wait to see how things develop. Do you want to continue?" After at least a minute of this, I asked one last time, "Do you want to go further?" Up to this point, she had only suggested being cautious, but suddenly she responded loudly, "Do you want to take this further? It's your decision, honey. It's okay. I know it's what you want. I'm going to go ahead." They continued their interaction intensely when I gently pulled her back to me, kissing her and softly saying, "When you're ready, take the next step." We began kissing passionately as she reacted strongly. She finally said, "Okay." She then gave a faint smile and said, "I hope we don't regret this." I knelt down again, my heart racing. I couldn't believe how involved everything was as their actions became more intense. Their interaction was very close, and it was clear that Tess was deeply focused on what was happening. I had never seen her react this way before. It didn't match how she usually was with me, but there she was, fully engaged with Tom. I couldn't imagine what he was feeling as things progressed between them. They sat together, quiet and still, the moment filled with tension. Tess seemed exhausted, as if drained from everything she had just experienced. The man's presence was overwhelming, and every small movement from him seemed to create an intense reaction. It was a surreal scene, knowing how deeply connected they had become, something that felt almost too much to comprehend. For what seemed like an eternity, they remained in that position, their breathing slowing down after the intensity had passed. Tess gently shifted, lifting herself slightly before lowering herself back again, the slow movements seeming to bring a sense of calm over them both. Everything felt like it had reached its peak, and they were now just letting the quiet take over. After a while, Tess carefully moved away, the space between them growing as they finally separated. There was a stillness in the air, a quiet that signaled the end of what had been an emotional and draining experience. Though the moment had been intense, there was now a sense of closure, as if the tension had melted away. As Tess stood up, balancing carefully on her high heels, she seemed a bit unsteady, likely because her legs had gone numb from staying in one position for too long. She didn't notice right away, but there was a clear discomfort as she adjusted her posture. I had Tess's underwear in my pocket, knowing she might need them soon. As she made her way toward the door, I stepped forward and said, "I've got your underwear if that's what you're looking for." She smiled, tired but appreciative, and took them from me, quickly slipping them back on and straightening her dress. She glanced at Tom and said, "I don't want anything more. It's time for you to go. Just unlock the door on your way out." Tom, sensing the change in the mood, wasted no time leaving, doing exactly as Tess had instructed. Tess, clearly drained, walked over to the couch and collapsed onto it, covering her eyes with her forearms, not saying a word. It was clear that something had shifted, and I could feel the weight of the moment. I walked over to her, knelt beside the couch, and gently lifted her arms from her face. "What's wrong?" I asked softly. She sighed, then looked at me with tired eyes and said, "I don't even know where to start, John. We've practically broken every promise we ever made to each other. I don't know how to process it. There's so much to think about." She was speaking from a place of regret, reflecting on what had just happened. It was clear that the situation weighed heavily on her. I listened quietly, knowing that there were no easy answers at that moment. Tess sat quietly, her exhaustion evident. I noticed how tired she seemed. her face showing the strain of everything that had happened. The atmosphere was heavy, and it felt like there was so much unspoken between us. I approached her, and as I gently took her hand, she shifted slightly. There was something different in her movements, a quiet acceptance of everything that had unfolded. I felt the weight of the moment, knowing that this was not like any other time we had been close. I paused for a second, lost in thought. It was strange how everything felt different now, even though we were together. Tess noticed my hesitation and softly asked, "What's wrong?" I didn't have the words to explain everything that was going through my mind. Instead, I leaned forward and we shared a quiet, intimate moment. It was clear that things had changed, but there was still a sense of connection between us. As we continued to embrace, Tess's breathing grew heavier, and the intensity of the moment took over. The emotions between us were strong, and though there were no words, we both understood the depth of what we were feeling. Our connection had been tested, but now, in this quiet space, we were finding a way through it. Finally, we both relaxed, the tension easing as we let go of everything that had been weighing us down. Tess rested her head against me, and for the first time in a while there was a sense of peace between us. I wish I could say that we both stayed calm during the moment, but the intensity of it all overwhelmed us. We shared a deep connection, and it felt like we both lost ourselves in the experience. We stayed like that for a while, neither of us wanting to break the silence or the closeness we felt. Later that Sunday morning, Tess and I finally made it back home. Throughout the day, even after she showered, I couldn't help but feel a sense of closeness between us. We spent a lot of time together, and it seemed like we were more connected than ever. By the middle of the week, things started to return to normal. We had spent so much time together that by the weekend, we were both a little worn out. Over the next few weeks, we discovered that talking openly to one another brought us closer. With my work keeping me away sometimes, it made our reunions even more meaningful. One time, when I came home after a long trip, Tess greeted me with a smile as she relaxed on the couch. I could tell she had been thinking of me, and I was glad to be back. I dropped my bags and walked over to her, feeling a sense of excitement about being home again. There was a playful energy between us, and I teased her about how much she must have missed me. She laughed and played along, her words adding to the lightheartedness of the moment. We both knew it was all in fun, and it made us both smile. As we shared this playful banter, I felt an overwhelming sense of love and connection with her. Being together like this after time apart made everything feel new again, and we both cherished these moments. The overwhelming feeling wouldn't stop. I think it surprised Tess because halfway through she exclaimed, "Oh my God, baby!" I gasped, it's okay, honey." Tess smiled brightly as I caught my breath and said, "John, I've never seen you act like that. You were really into it." After a few moments, I confessed, "Even though I knew it wasn't real, what you said really got to me. I've never felt anything like it before, but I'm glad none of it was true, right?" She laughed and said, "Of course it's not true, sweetheart. I was just trying to get your attention, see? It works on both of us." I replied, "Yes, but it's strange what excites us, isn't it? I never thought I would imagine my wife with someone else." She giggled and said with a playful expression, "Yes, it excites us because it feels so wrong, like forbidden fruit. We got caught up with that guy Tom without thinking it through, or at least I hope it wasn't planned." I quickly said, "Oh no, that just happened, but you have to admit it was something we both went along with." She looked at me, holding my face gently, and said, "I love you more than you know. I would never hurt you. I would do anything to protect our relationship." Then she giggled and added, "Just be careful what you approve of. We have to be smarter than our fantasies." I quickly agreed. Months passed, and I consciously stepped back from some of the things we had been doing. I tried to have more normal moments with Tess. It started to feel routine, but she continued to express her love for me. The issue was she hadn't felt that excitement since our last playful conversation. She seemed to pull back a little, and I noticed it became just ordinary moments. A few weeks later, on the 4th of July, we found ourselves at a big neighborhood party. Tess and I both drank a lot, and it felt like a different night. Everyone kept complimenting us, saying, "What a beautiful couple. You two belong together." It wasn't until around 1 in the morning on the 5th that I thought we should head home. Tess looked like she could fall asleep. There were only a few people left outside when I told 3 young men, probably around 19 or 20, "Please tell Ron and Sharon thanks for a great party." As I said that, one of the young men pressed play on a CD player and asked, "Can I have one dance with Tess?" Tess was quite tipsy, and this guy seemed like he was still in college. Tess was 25, and while that wasn't a big deal, there was a noticeable difference in maturity between her and a 19-year-old, especially with alcohol involved. Tess started giggling, saying, "No, I really have to go, it's late." As we walked toward home, one of the guys, clearly drunk, followed us. He playfully grabbed Tess around the waist, saying, "Don't go, stay a little longer." Over time, Tess and I started having more open conversations, and I noticed she had become more confident. About 2 weeks after we had run into Tom, Tess started surprising me with some of the things she said. One evening, while we were sitting in the living room, Tess shocked me by leaning back on the couch and teasing me with a scenario. "What if you came home one evening and found someone here with me?" she said, her eyes playful. Caught off guard, I replied, "I'm not sure what I'd do." Tess continued, adding to the story with a mischievous grin, and I realized she was just trying to keep things fun and playful between us. "You know it's just a fantasy, right?" she asked. I could tell she was a little concerned that she might have taken things too far, but I reassured her. "I know, it's all just for fun." She smiled, and we shared a quiet, intimate moment, knowing that our connection was still strong and that we trusted each other. As we held each other close, Tess whispered, "Tell me what you're thinking." It was clear that we both enjoyed these moments of closeness and honesty, even when they caught us by surprise. I had no idea what was happening, so I started to ask, "You know what I want, right?" She answered, "Yes, but I want to hear you say it." Still a bit confused, I asked, "When are we going to make it happen? I want it to be soon." I thought she expected me to say I wanted something specific, and she seemed ready to agree but didn't want to say it first. I asked again, "When are we going to do this?" Just as I finished speaking, she said, "I don't know." At that moment, I was really curious, and I didn't care much about what she meant. She clearly thought that it was something I really wanted. Eager to find out more, I said, "I don't know, other people find a way to do it, why can't we? We could just go online and figure it out." I continued, thinking we were talking about finding someone, asking, "Are you sure you're okay with it?" She surprised me when she answered, "I guess I am. 1 person, 3 people, 5 people, what difference does it make as long as you enjoy it? That's a whole different story." Thanks for watching this video. Don't forget to subscribe to Infidelity Plus to stay updated with more captivating tales of infidelity and payback. Turn on notifications so you're the first to see our latest content.